Hello, vessel of the great I am here. This clip, this video is one that I found, and it provides good archaeological evidence and scientific evidence to prove biblical scriptures. I do not agree with everything in this video, but the science is there. I also want to note that if you're a true believer in Christ, you do not need proof. You do not need evidence to know that God is God. Jesus is the Son of God. He was the Word made flesh who dwelt among us. Okay, if you're a true born-again Christian, you know by faith that every word of the Bible is truth. From Exodus, from Genesis, all the way to Revelation. If you believe every single story, Noah's Ark, Jonah, okay, all of it. Jesus' miracles, okay, if you know it in your heart for it to be truth, then you don't need proof. But this is a video you could show other people, for other people who believe in science, along with my videos I've made about the Big Bang and God. This is a longer video that goes through all the stories of the Bible. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Okay, Jesus' miracles. It starts with the Garden of Eden. So it's just an awesome, awesome video, and I'm going to post it to my site. So enjoy the show.
Significant technological and scientific breakthroughs have recently revealed new facts and evidence that confirm the accuracy and authenticity of many passages throughout the Bible. Unlocking ancient secrets of the Bible highlights these new technologies as well as recent archaeological finds to substantiate several stories, statements, and historical notations found throughout the Bible. Each example of this is presented by accredited scholars and experts in their fields. While not a review of the entire Bible, this documentary establishes the verifiable scientific truth of certain sections of the Bible that millions have already accepted on faith, but can now prove with hard facts as well. Was the earth created in a single moment? Could Eve actually be the mother of all humanity? And is there hardcore scientific proof that Noah's great flood actually occurred? You're about to find out as we unearth some of the most spectacular evidence ever seen.
Scratched out on 3 continents in 3 languages by 40 different authors over a course of 1,500 years, no collection of ancient writings is as widely read, closely cherished, and critically examined as the Bible. But are the words in this historic book the very words of God? Did the stories found in the Bible actually take place? And is there any tangible evidence that we can actually hold in our hands that proves the Bible is true? You're about to find out. Appropriately, our investigation begins with the most famous line in written history. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But is this believable? Did an all-powerful God create the universe? What does modern science say about this question?
Well, basically, you have to believe that matter has always existed, or it was created.
Today, the evidence overwhelmingly supports the Big Bang theory. Imagine for a moment all that exists in the vast universe, every mountain range, every forest, every body of water, every distant planet, everything squeezed into a microscopic point of beginning. Scientists say the universe exploded and began from that initial point.
As the universe has expanded, it's cooled. Anything that expands cools. And right now, the universe has a temperature of 3 degrees above zero. We detect this radiation as microwave radiation.
Observatories at the South Pole measure the distribution of microwaves through space and provide information regarding the very early conditions of the universe.
And so the Big Bang is not a theoretical idea, it's something we're observing and measuring.
The best scientific evidence suggests the universe began, thereby confirming the words of Genesis.
And there is compelling scientific evidence that this biblical story of Adam and Eve actually is history.
Can every single human being, past, present, and future, trace their family tree back to an original man and woman?
And the scientific community actually refers to this genetic Adam that they have found as the Y chromosome Adam, and they refer to the mitochondrial DNA woman as Eve, and this is referred to in the scientific literature as the Garden of Eden hypothesis.
They took mitochondrial sequences from a number of different ethnic groups around the globe and determined that everyone has descended from one female.
Could this female be Eve, the first woman created in the book of Genesis? The evidence is compelling.
Could also go back and look at the Y chromosomes, and you could trace a lineage through the Y chromosomes to Adam. And the idea is basically the same, looking at differences in the Y chromosome sequence. Scientists did take a look at this. In fact, many have taken a look at this and determined that, yes, we all came from probably one individual.
Here, our investigation moves from scientific conjecture to the flesh, blood, and bone of creation.
What's interesting is that the apex, the climax of that creation, the last thing mentioned as created, after everything else is prepared for him, is Adam. And it says that Adam is created out of the dust of the ground and out of the breath of God. And what that tells us is that yes, human beings are a part of creation like everything else. But it also says that we have, and that Adam had, a special relationship with God.
According to the Bible, Adam was made responsible for all that was on earth and enjoyed an intimate relationship with nature. Although Adam walked in perfect harmony with creation, he was not complete.
When Adam and Eve first met each other, God brought the woman to the man. And Adam seems to be ecstatic that he has found now a counterpart. And it's interesting because he finds her right after he's named all the animals. So it's fresh in his mind that there's nobody like him until he meets her.
When Adam was created, he wasn't created like a robot. Adam had free will. So there was a question whether or not he would obey God or not.
Ancient desert cultures highly valued the tantalizing taste of fruit. It's no accident the book of Genesis uses the image of a fruit tree to signify knowledge.
They're at this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the serpent, who is named Shiny, Eve is smitten by him, and he tempts her.
The serpent employed a strategy he would revisit. He questioned the reliability of God's word.
And so now when the serpent is tempting Eve, the serpent says, oh, is it really true that, you're not supposed to eat of any of the trees of the garden? And then Eve says, well, let me put it straight. She says, we're not supposed to eat or touch of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
And that's the function of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which God told Adam not to eat of. Here's the point. There's nothing really inherently evil about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. What it involves is the question, will Adam obey God, even when he might not understand the reasons why? Or will he think he knows better than God and eat the fruit?
As punishment for their disobedience, God exiled Adam and Eve from the garden. They were forced to live outside God's close protection and enter the harsh reality of broken communion. According to the book of Genesis, the fall from grace initiates a time of unprecedented evil. Turmoil and violence run roughshod over the earth. Brother murders brother. This is the backdrop for one of the most controversial stories in the Old Testament, the story of Noah and his ark.
When we come to the time of Noah, God has been patient up to this particular point, but now he determines to put an end to sinful humanity by means of a flood.
I will bring flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, and everything that is on the earth shall die.
Noah obeyed God and prepared his family. Noah's family filled the boat with food and gathered the animals that would soon repopulate the earth. Initially skeptical, the people of Noah's day plead for mercy. It was too late, as God closed the door to the ark.
The Old Testament uses the cubit as length measure, and a cubit stands for 1.5 feet. And when we do the conversion from what we read in the book of Genesis, we see that the ark was really, really large.
Conversions put the size of the ark at 450 feet long, 150 feet wide, and 75 feet high. But clearly, a catastrophic global flood would leave geological and anthropological imprints.
And so, for evidence for Noah's flood, what we really look for is evidence of catastrophic processes, cataclysmic processes, operating on a regional, maybe hemispherical, even global scale. And you know, the more we look, that's what we see.
One thing you might expect is billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. And that's exactly what we find in the geological record. A record of lots of things suddenly buried, including very large animals buried whole.
How does the theory of a global flood fit with geological features like the Grand Canyon?
Yet we tell different stories about its history. Now, the way the evolutionist is taught to think, the way I was taught to think, the way all of us are taught to think in our education, is that present processes have done it all. And so you see this 18-mile wide canyon and this little bitty 100-foot river down there, and that river is, I suppose, doing some erosion.
At present rates, the river would take millions upon millions of years to carve out the Grand Canyon.
But the creationist might say a different idea. It says this looks for all the world like a larger volume of water came through here and carved this thing out rapidly. That would be the great flood of Noah's day.
Could this interpretation of data be supported?
By the way, even my evolutionary colleagues nowadays have recognized that the Colorado River would never carve a canyon like this. The mechanics of erosion are all wrong, that it just wouldn't carve a canyon like this. And they have come to the conclusion also that a huge volume of water racing through here not very long ago carved this canyon out rapidly. That's consistent with and supportive of the biblical doctrine of the Great Flood of Noah's day.
Coming up, did the original Sin City, Sodom and Gomorrah, actually exist? And are there astonishing scientific predictions in the book of Job?
Genesis depicts God as slow to anger, yet quick and decisive in judgment. Perhaps no story from the Old Testament demonstrates the intensity of God's wrath more vividly than the tragedy of Lot and his family.
The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is about sin and about punishment. It's about God deciding that he's had enough of unrighteousness and wickedness, and he's going to take action, and he's going to destroy it.
After a heated territorial dispute with his uncle Abraham, Lot decided to settle his caravan outside the gates of Sodom and Gomorrah, an area known for its desperately wicked ways. Ultimately, Lot moved into the city even as God sent messengers to declare Sodom and Gomorrah would crumble under the weight of its sin.
Lot had a pretty hard time in Sodom. Here he was among all these people who, by the accounts of the story, are pretty harsh to strangers, and he is a stranger, wanting to fit in, but not really succeeding. We can learn from that story. And so when the angels come to rescue him, the rest of the town hassles them.
Lot's family fled in a mad panic.
We get this one little piece of information that Lot's wife, for some reason, decides to look back. Just maybe in regret, or maybe do I really want to leave this place? And she turns into a pillar of salt.
The most obvious explanation for the destruction of Sodom would be a seismic event, a large earthquake that unleashed a lot of material. The Bible talks about a lot of fire coming down and burning up Sodom, and the evidence at that site is that the buildings burned.
Archaeologists believe the ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah, discovered southeast of the Dead Sea, sit on a fault line. Evidence suggests buildings burned from fires started on rooftops. Geologists further theorize that pressure from an earthquake could have emitted sulfur-laden bitumen, a substance present in the area. The dense smoke reported by Abraham is consistent with a fire from such material.
Sodom and Gomorrah is referenced in secondary literature all throughout the Second Temple period and into the New Testament period. It's mentioned specifically in the Genesis Apocryphon, which is one of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Next, we examine a story about a man who wrestles with the stubborn reality of evil in the world. Not only does his response provide readers a virtuous example, it suggests an awareness of the scientific laws that govern our universe. His name is Job.
Job was a man that lived probably 3,500 to 4,000 years ago. We don't know exactly where he lived, but we know that he was quite wealthy, herdsman and a farmer, was very much blessed by God in terms of wealth and well-being, good family, excellent reputation in the community.
At the beginning of the book of Job, the readers are introduced to a scene from the heavenly courtroom, where these figures called the sons of God, later we would think of them more as angels or as God's cabinet, so to speak, come to report to him about their activities.
One of these figures, Satan, acted as both eager prosecutor and willing executioner.
And Satan's appeal to God was, well, this man is so righteous because you've blessed him with so much physical well-being. And let me do an experiment. I'll take that all away, and I'll bet you that Job will rebel against you. And God says, you can do that, but don't take his life. And you know the story. Satan, with God's permission and consent, brings all of these physical calamities and disasters upon Job's life.
So he loses his property, he loses his family, he loses his health. He's kind of driven to the lowest level. God has abandoned me, or so it seems.
The Book of Job presents readers with a long-standing ethical quandary. Why do bad things happen to good people?
believers in God can go through great suffering, difficulty, and trial. Their lives can have havoc ruined within it. That doesn't necessarily at all mean that they have done something wrong or that God is bringing judgment. Trial and difficulty are often God's way of pruning a person's character.
Not only does the book of Job communicate valuable moral truths, but some scientists believe it speaks of future scientific discoveries.
The book of Job talks about the beginning of the universe and how it's a beginning beyond matter, energy, space, and time. It's the first book of the Bible that talks about the expansion of the universe. And it was Fred Hoyle, the famous British astronomer, who said that the Bible is amazing at what it says about cosmology, that the universe is traceable back to an actual beginning of matter, energy, space, and time.
How could a book written several centuries before the advent of modern science contain such mind-boggling information?
One of the dominant themes you see in the book of Job is that it talks about God creating life in optimal form with optimal designs, but not just optimal life forms, but optimal ecological relationships. In other words, he creates carnivores to relate to herbivores, so the carnivores are only able to kill off the weak, the dying, and the sick, or the unwary. Not so effective that they wipe them all out, or so ineffective they can't kill any. The ecological relationships are idealized.
Scientists count up to 10 other scientific predictions suggested in the book of Job. They cover issues in the field of meteorology, oceanography, the study of prehistoric animals and fossil remains.
Coming up, Abraham, Joseph, and Moses. Were these men legends or proven real flesh and blood?
In Job, the reader witnesses astonishing acts of faith. Although Job suffered unjustly, he refused to curse God and instead trusted God's mysterious ways. And speaking of faith, no man in the Old Testament demonstrated faith more fearlessly than Abraham.
Throughout most of the story of Abraham's life, his wife Sarah is barren and unable to bear children despite however many years they've been trying to do so, and it's really a source of some frustration for them.
How is it possible for Abraham to be father of a great nation when, after repeated effort and petition, his wife Sarah remained barren?
The miracle of the promise to Abraham is that so many years go by and Sarah never gives Abraham a child. She's well into her 90s before she's said to conceive this child. And it's this miracle alone, the inconceivability of how a woman in her 90s can give a child to her husband, is the promise, once again, that God acts in history, that God keeps his promises.
Abraham was rewarded for his steadfast faith. He received his long-desired son, the heir to his promise. Abraham and Sarah instructed Isaac in the way of the Lord, as Isaac served as a tangible reminder of God's faithfulness. But God was not done with Abraham. He had a further request. Abraham, confused yet unflinchingly faithful, prepared to obey God. Satisfied by Abraham's faith, God intervened to provide a substitute.
Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy. Now I know you fear God, because you have not withheld your son from me. Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars.
Skeptics denied the existence of Abraham's hometown, Ur of the Chaldees, until excavations at the beginning of the 20th century uncovered a temple tower at the mouth of the Euphrates in Mesopotamia. The name Abraham appears in Mesopotamian records. Now, one of Abraham's most famous descendants is Joseph, the son of Jacob.
The story of Joseph really kicks off when Jacob gives Joseph a special coat.
Joseph's status as favored son created jealousy amongst his brothers. Given opportunity, they conspired against him. The brothers sold Joseph into slavery and led their father headlong into a heart-shattering lie. They told their father Joseph had died. Upon his arrival in Egypt, Joseph was sold into the service of Potiphar, a high-ranking Egyptian officer. Joseph prospered in the service of Potiphar until Potiphar's wife developed an appetite for Joseph.
She wants to be intimate with him. And Joseph, of course, resists her overtures. But she's so upset, she frames him. And this results in Joseph being thrown into jail.
Jail was brutal, yet God was with Joseph during his time in bondage.
A pivotal point takes place in the prison and also is related to his gift of being a dream interpreter. While he's in prison, he's there with the chief cupbearer and the chief baker.
The Pharaoh, troubled by recurring dreams, sought an interpreter. His cupbearer remembered Joseph and brought him before the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh provided Joseph the details of his dreams. Miraculously, Joseph interpreted the dreams as prophetic warnings of a coming cycle of famine. Relieved that he was able to prepare his kingdom in advance, Pharaoh rewarded Joseph by elevating him to second in command. Some critics have questioned the story of Joseph, arguing a foreigner could never achieve such high rank in the Egyptian court. But the evidence says otherwise.
We do know of people of foreign origin adopting Egyptian ways and making it right up to the top of the Egyptian administration.
Joseph's story is all the more remarkable as he was a Hebrew living in an Egyptian world. Now, in time, there emerged a generation of Egyptians who were unfamiliar with Joseph's good works. In fact, the Pharaoh grew threatened by the ever-increasing presence of the foreign Hebrews. In a fit of frightful paranoia, the Pharaoh decreed that the midwives should drown the children of the Hebrew captives in the muddy waters of the River Nile. It is out of these bleak circumstances that we get the story of Moses, the visionary lawgiver.
Amram and Jochebed, the parents of Moses, put him in this little ark, this little boat made of rushes in the Nile, and then led his fate up to God. God was certainly kind, because it was the daughter of the Pharaoh who picks him out of the bulrushes. And that's what Moses means, drawn from the water. And then he became a prince in the house of the king.
Moses was tutored and trained in Pharaoh's court, where he became learned in the esteemed knowledge of the Egyptians, mathematics, philosophy, medicine, and architecture. Although Moses had an aristocratic upbringing, he couldn't neglect his burden for fellow Hebrews, who were often abused and blamed for all manner of trouble. One day Moses witnessed an incident destined to alter his life.
He deserved to die like a dog. These people...
Filled with righteous indignation, Moses exacted revenge. Stunned, Moses buried the body and his crime beneath the hot desert sand.
Moses is now a marked man, of course, after he had murdered this taskmaster. And so he goes into the Sinai Peninsula.
After spending 40 years in Sinai as a shepherd, Moses had an illuminating encounter with the divine. exodus of the Hebrews from Egypt begins with a miraculous escape from Pharaoh's feverish pursuit. The sojourn from bondage into the Promised Land, though, is marked by murmuring and disregard for God. Moses is called upon again to deliver a corrective message to the unruly people.
Well, the interesting thing about the Ten Commandments is they tap in and coincide with what our human reason tells us as well.
Ethicists suggest the Ten Commandments appeal to a universal code that regulates human behavior.
The Ten Commandments, actually govern both religious aspects of life. The first three of the commandments deal specifically with a particular religion, but the other seven really are fundamental principles that every society ascribes to. Thou shalt not kill, the prohibition on theft.
The Ten Commandments stand as an ethical foundation for the establishment of future civic liberties.
The Declaration of Independence talks about the self-evident truth that all men, all human beings are created equal, and that we have inalienable rights, not from government, but bestowed on us by our Creator. And that really sets the foundation for what kind of government we have and what the purpose of government is.
Coming up, who was the great hero Samson? And did he actually do the unbelievable things the Bible says he did?
The world over, Moses is celebrated as a courageous visionary. In fact, according to the Bible, his encounter with God produced the moral principles on which most modern civilizations rest. Remember that Moses was born under the threat of death. Our next hero has more promising beginnings. His name is Samson.
When Samson's born, his parents give him over to what's called a Nazirite vow. The Nazirite vow includes many things, but one is that you never drink wine, you never drink fermented or any kind of alcohol. The other is that you never cut your hair.
There's nothing special or magical about the vows themselves. They're a sign of devotion to God. And if Samson is supposed to be about the work of God, then it would be important for him to show devotion in some particular way.
In a time of brutal oppression under Philistine rule, Samson emerged as a leader of great physical strength.
The book of Judges, a judge is a military hero and a charismatic leader, somebody who shows a particular ability to fight and to lead others in battle against Israel's enemies.
His physical strength found rival only in his moral weakness.
Samson has one other vice, and that is Samson loves Philistine women. And this was a no-no in ancient Israel, but he loves them. And the one woman that he really loves is Delilah.
Philistine lords realize how devoted Samson is to Delilah. They use her as a kind of spy to find out the secret of his great power.
Delilah was pressured into action.
On several occasions, Delilah presses Samson to tell her why he's so strong.
Samson thirsted for Delilah.
And at first he lies. He does not reveal the truth about his Nazirite vows. And in the end, he doesn't even quite come clean. But he tells her that the secret of his power is in his hair. And if his hair is all shaved off, then he will become as weak as any man. She passes this information on to the leaders of the Philistines. They sneak up on him while he is asleep at her house.
Samson loses his supernatural strength, his God-given strength, and they were able to bind him, and they gouge out his eyes.
Samson gets his power back really by praying for it, by showing devotion to God, by asking God. God restores his strength. Samson topples the temple, and as the story says, he kills more Philistines in his death than he did previously in the rest of his life.
Samson's pursuit of pleasure cost him his freedom, but the Philistines' ropes could not stifle his determination. Today, the world looks for leaders who combine the courage and strength of a person like Samson and with the wisdom and judgment of a sage. All of those qualities can be found in our last hero, David.
God sends Samuel to Bethlehem, to the family of Jesse, to anoint David to be the next king.
God's choice of David was unique because in the ancient Near East, and also with the first choice of the king, what were people looking for? They were looking for the biggest, strongest individual.
David would soon be given the opportunity to prove himself fit as a leader.
And of course, this is the famous David and Goliath story. David, again, is back with the sheep while his brothers are in the army fighting the Philistines. But the Philistines are technologically superior to Israel.
The Philistines employed iron weapons, thereby putting Israel at a tactical disadvantage. The only strategic leverage for the Jews was control of high ground, making Philistine attack difficult.
The Philistines have recourse to an ancient custom, which is a battle of champions. So they put their champion Goliath out to challenge a champion from Israel.
King Saul made a declaration to his soldiers. The man who kills the giant will receive riches, his daughter as a wife, and will live tax-free. Still, the soldiers were afraid.
So no one wants to fight him. But David comes to deliver lunch to his brothers on the battlefield, and he hears that this is going on, and he's personally offended that no one is willing to fight Goliath. Not because he thinks he can defeat him on his own strength, but he knows the power of his God. And so David takes the challenge and does what no one else is willing to do, and that is face Goliath.
David threw himself at the feet of divine fate.
Now, David used a slingshot, and we kind of think of kids using slingshots, but these are serious weapons. Armies use them. As a matter of fact, within the army of Israel, the Benjaminites were particularly adept at the sling.
The sling held stones the size of baseballs. The gifted musician called upon God to empower him. Skeptics long argued that David was a legend contrived by a band of inconsequential nomads, until 1993, when archaeologists digging at Tel Dan in northern Israel discovered a stone slab on which David's name is inscribed, thereby becoming the first archaeological reference to David outside the Old Testament. David became the most celebrated king in Israel's history, as his lineage carries the blood of earthly royalty.
Coming up, what did scientists dig up in the 1960s that proves the Bible's accuracy?
Over 400 years passed between the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi, and the arrival of a religious teacher whose birth, life, and miracles would soon serve to shape the course of human history. Was this teacher, Jesus of Nazareth, simply a good man, or was he sent directly from the right hand of God? Let us take a look at the life of Jesus as recorded in the New Testament Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Our question for the experts is, are these gospel accounts reliable?
The reliability of the Bible has been repeatedly proven and demonstrated. Many people try to find contradictions in the Bible, but there really are none.
I've yet to encounter any historical evidence that is contrary to what's found in Scripture, what's found in the Bible. To me, the Bible really is impressive in terms of its historical accuracy.
As archaeology continues to uncover new evidence and as more manuscripts are discovered, the whole trajectory is that the biblical authors were very reliable in how they presented the history.
The usual rule is the farther removed you are from events of the first century, the hazier it ought to become. Because of archaeology and because of 2,000 years of excellent biblical scholarship, the opposite is taking place. We're getting a clearer and sharper image of what's happening.
There is no historical evidence that disproves the Bible.
In setting out to examine the reliability of the Bible, what kind of proof will we require?
Very often when we talk about proof, people are thinking in terms of a mathematical proof. They want it as solid as 2 + 2 = 4.
But historical evidence doesn't add up the same way a math problem might. Evidence in history often relies on the quality of the testimony. So the question must be asked, how did we get these stories about Jesus? Where did they come from?
Everyone agrees there was a period of orality when the gospel stories were passed down orally from community to community, mouth to mouth, if you will, as opposed to being written down, and that process took a few decades. But it was in a Jewish context in which they were used to reciting prayers that they had memorized.
If this story about Jesus and his teachings had not been important, they would have been lost a long time ago. So they passed on these traditions.
People heard Jesus tell a story. They saw Jesus work a miracle. They remembered, they shared, they turned that story over in their minds.
The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 1960s provided scholars an opportunity to measure copying accuracy. The scrolls, believed to be from the 1st century A.D., contained an excerpt of the Old Testament book Isaiah. Scholars compared the Isaiah fragment with next available copy from the 9th century. The results are startling.
99.9% same text in both. So this idea that the copyists have, totally changed scriptures just does not work. And it really is a pretty worthless argument.
There are non-biblical accounts of Jesus, and these are very important. In fact, some scholars have actually demonstrated that you can get the basic story about Jesus by not even looking at the New Testament.
To the surprise of some, Jesus is also mentioned in other religious texts.
When we look at the broader field of religion, and we consider writings from the Muslim world, the Quran, or from the larger Jewish world, the Midrash, Talmud, that we discover that Jesus is also featured in those writings as well.
Coming up, what proof is there that Jesus actually lived? And is there any evidence that he actually performed miracles?
Now we turn our attention to the contents of the Gospels. What kind of person do they portray? What do they tell us of Jesus himself?
The Gospels are biographies, but they're not biographies in the modern sense.
Modern biography depends upon first-hand accounts, tape recordings, video recordings, writings left behind by the subjects.
Just what kind of person do the Gospels portray? Non-biblical legend has Jesus traveling as far as Egypt and India during his early life. But the next image we get of Jesus in the Gospels is at his baptism. Jesus arrives at the Jordan River in order to be baptized by John. A religious zealot whose scraggy appearance and fiery preaching made him an unpopular outcast. According to the Gospel accounts, Jesus' baptism initiates a 3-year period of preaching and healing. He led a relatively normal life. He worked, he studied, he attended parties like the wedding feast at Cana, where he apparently left an everlasting impression. Jesus and his disciples arrive as guests of a wedding. Ancient weddings are similar to modern weddings in several ways.
There was a real strong sense of reciprocity in the ancient Near East with weddings, where people would give very lavish gifts to this new bride and couple, and they expected a great party in return. Mary,
Jesus' mother, responsible for the meal, arrives at an embarrassing truth. They've run out of wine. Yet Jesus' response hints at his divine purpose.
He then tells the waiters to fill up these stone jars with water. He doesn't tell the waiters to look the other way or to leave the room as he brings a vial out or a potion and dumps it into the water. He merely tells them, okay, go ahead and start drawing the wine, and the water becomes wine.
Archaeologists have found pieces of large stone jars of the type the Gospel says Jesus used when he turned water into wine at a Jewish wedding in the Galilee village of Cana. This church at Cana is believed to be the site of Jesus' first miracle.
Coming up, what did archaeologists uncover that definitively proves one of the Bible's most notorious women really did exist?
The Gospels tell us that as Jesus walked the region, healing the lame and preaching the forgiveness of sin, an evil plot against his cousin John the Baptist was unfolding. John the Baptist had apparently offended Herod Antipas, the ruler over Galilee, and Herodias, his niece and new wife, by publicly denouncing their relationship as wicked. Herodias conspired with her daughter Salome to silence John the Baptist once and for all. Herod's birthday celebration provided a perfect occasion for their devious plan.
Evidently, the floor show was dull, and so his dear second wife, Herodias, in order to liven things up, had her dancing daughter, Salome, come out and do some sensuous dance, which evidently turned Herod's head. And so he says, ask what you will, and it's yours, even to the half of my kingdom. And so Salome, instead of doing the logical thing, asking for half of his kingdom, asked for the head of John the Baptist, who was in prison at that palace.
Herod honors his oath by providing Salome and her mother Herodias the head of the slain prophet. Equally startling, recent archaeological digs have shed light on the reliability of this gospel story.
New Testament also give us an important evidence about Herod Antipas in connection with the story of beheading the head of John the Baptist, which was apparently here, although the story is legendary, but the palace of Herod Antipas and the dance of Salome was exactly here on the remains that I'm going to show you, because we found the pavement.
The dig, conducted in northern Israel in 2006, proved to be historic.
Perhaps you are the first camera team to take the picture of it. First whatsoever. First in history. Now, when we excavated the foundations of the Basilica, of the reception hall, we were completely surprised to find remains from the 1st century AD, even from the beginning of the 1st century. And we found beautiful marble floor made of different colors, and we dated it by pottery and by coins to the 1st century. And since marble was so expensive, And since all the parallels for marble come from Herodian palaces, I'm almost convinced that this floor was part of the famous palace that Herod Antipas built, and that was the background for the famous dance.
Evidence from the field of archaeology lends the Gospel accounts a measure of historical credibility. According to the Gospels, Jesus continued to preach and demonstrate his power over nature. He used this power to ease the suffering of the people who believed in his message. Jesus was an itinerant preacher who often moved from town to town so as to spread his message. According to the Gospels, his journey brought him to the pool of Siloam. Blind from birth, the man visited Siloam in the hopes of receiving a miracle. The Jews believed an angel might appear at the pool, stir the waters, and offer divine healing. According to the Gospels, the man believed in the possibility of healing and received it at the hands of Jesus. But is there any evidence that such a place existed?
Well, of course, the great good news now is just a little bit further down the hill at Silwan, one of the suburbs of South Jerusalem. They've discovered, of course, the magnificent entrance to the pool.
The Gospels depict Jesus as exercising authority over several aspects of nature. Each miracle Jesus performed raised his profile and further convinced his disciples that he was the Messiah.
Among Jesus' miracles, one of the most spectacular, of course, is the stilling of the tempest.
One day, Jesus and his followers were out on the Sea of Galilee. Although familiar with the sea, a terrible storm whipped the disciples into a frightful panic.
And in the midst of this, the disciples are panicking. The breakers are splashing on the bow of the deck. They're afraid their ship might break up.
They rushed to wake Jesus from his sleep. Jesus rose to calm both the storm and their fears.
Again, this is a very strong statement of his authority, that all of creation must respond to his spoken word because he is their creator.
But are the basic facts of this story credible?
The Sea of Galilee is a very interesting place. It's actually in a bowl, and so they'd have violent windstorms as the wind would shoot through the mountains, and it would create very scary nautical situations.
One of the most exciting recent archaeological discoveries took place up in Galilee, where a boat that Jesus and the disciples could have used came to light in the spring of 1986.
The boat could hold 12 to 15 people, the amount suggested in the Gospels. The boat had a sleeping section consistent with the Gospel account.
Coming up, startling new evidence that the crucifixion of Jesus was an actual historical event, and eyewitnesses that claim the resurrection really happened.
The tragic events of the final days of Jesus' life parallels the outline mapped out by the Old Testament prophets. The Passion of Christ, as it is called, has captivated billions for centuries with its heartbreaking depiction of Jesus' final hours on earth. Over the years, many have become skeptical about the story of the Passion. Some claim its infamous characters such as Pontius Pilate and the Jewish high priest Caiaphas never even existed. Others suggest that the resurrection was an elaborate hoax. What do our experts say? The last 4 days of Jesus' life, commonly referred to as the Passion, is said to be the most intriguing yet controversial part of the Gospels. In the days leading up to his crucifixion, Jesus rode triumphantly into Jerusalem. As he passed through the city walls, spectators rushed out of their homes to greet him and shower him with palms ripped off of trees. This would later become what we commonly know today as Palm Sunday. Word of Jesus' arrival spread quickly to the Jewish high priests of Sanhedrin. They saw the popular Galilean as a serious threat to their control of the Jewish people. Caiaphas, the most skeptical and cynical of the Sanhedrin, conspired with the rest of the council to put an end to Jesus' ministry.
In the story of the trial of Jesus, there's this fellow Caiaphas, the high priest.
In the early 1990s, a significant archaeological discovery was made in an excavated tomb within the city of Jerusalem. A series of small boxes called ossuaries were found. Once the body of a loved one had completely decomposed, the family would gather the remains and place them inside one of these bone boxes.
And in order to remember whose bones are put in which box, they would scratch the names on the end of the box. So when this tomb was excavated, they actually found